The desperate signal. The sky above Veridon 6 was burning. High above the planet, massive alien warships floated like dark shadows. The Greylock, a ruthless race of conquerors, had arrived 2 days ago. They had not come to negotiate. They had not come to offer peace. They had come for one purpose only: destruction. The Zerathians, the peaceful people of Veridon 6, had never known war. Their cities were built for science, art, and learning. They had no great armies, no warships, no mighty weapons. They had believed in diplomacy, in unity. But now, none of that mattered. The enemy was here, and they showed no mercy. A planet on the brink. Inside the main control room of the Zerathian capital, Eldrin Vass, the planetary leader, stood trembling. The walls around him shook as another explosion rocked the city. The lights flickered. His people were screaming over the communications channels. The Greylock have broken through the west sector. We cannot stop them. They are destroying the evacuation ships. We are losing. The signal cut off. Silence. Then only static. Eldrin clenched his fists. The Greylock were not just winning. They were exterminating his people. Beside him, Laura Kane, his chief strategist, spoke in a shaky voice. "Sir, the Alliance has not responded. We have sent 100 distress calls. No one is coming." Eldrin turned, his eyes filled with despair. "No one." Laura shook her head. "They have abandoned us." For decades, the Galactic Alliance had promised protection. The Zerathians had believed that if ever a great threat came, the Alliance would stand by them. But the truth was clear now. The Alliance only cared about power. Veridon 6 was not important enough to save. Eldrin felt his chest tighten. Was this how it ended? A final, desperate hope. "We must try again," Eldrin whispered. Laura sighed. "There is no one left to call." Eldrin turned to the communications officer. "Send a new distress signal. But this time, do not send it to the Alliance. Send it to everyone. Every ship, every planet, every race that can hear it." The officer hesitated. "Sir, that is against protocol." "Do it," Eldrin roared. A moment later, the signal was sent. A desperate call for help, reaching across the galaxy. "This is Eldrin Vass, leader of Veridon 6. Our people are dying. The Greylock are destroying everything. We beg for aid. Anyone who hears this, please help us. If there is mercy in your hearts, if there is honor among your people, do not let us die alone." Static followed. No answer. The command room was silent. The officers looked at each other, their faces filled with fear. Outside, another explosion lit up the dark sky. Time was running out. Laura lowered her head. "No one is coming," she whispered. Eldrin closed his eyes. Was this their fate? A signal in the dark. Far across the stars, on the edge of known space, a small human fleet drifted in the void. The TSS Valor, a Terran warship, floated silently. It was part of Task Force Omega, a group of human ships patrolling the galactic border. Their mission was simple: watch, listen, and be ready. On the bridge of the Valor, Captain Elias Carter leaned back in his chair. His crew had been on patrol for weeks. Nothing exciting had happened. "Captain," a voice suddenly called out. Carter turned to see Lieutenant Mason, his communications officer, looking at the screen with wide eyes. "What is it, Lieutenant?" Carter asked. "We just picked up an open distress call," Mason replied. "It's from a planet called Veridon 6. Carter frowned. "Veridon 6? That's Zerathian territory." "Yes, sir. It sounds bad. Their planet is under attack. No response from the Alliance." Carter narrowed his eyes. The Alliance was supposed to protect its member planets, but if they weren't answering, it meant they had already decided to let Veridon 6 fall. He sighed. "Send it to my console." Mason tapped a few buttons. The distress call played through the bridge. "We beg for aid. Anyone who hears this, please help us. The bridge fell silent. The crew listened. The desperation in Eldrin's voice was undeniable. "Sir," Mason said quietly. "They sound desperate." Carter leaned forward, his fingers tapping the armrest of his chair. He had seen too many abandoned worlds, too many innocent lives lost because the powerful did nothing. He looked at the tactical screen. Veridon 6 was not far. "Sir," his first officer, Commander Lee, spoke. "If we move now, we could be there in less than a day." Carter exhaled. It was risky. They didn't know what they were walking into. But one thing was clear. The Zerathians had called for help, and humanity would answer. The human response. The bridge of the TSS Valor was silent. Captain Elias Carter sat in his command chair, staring at the distress call still displayed on the holoscreen. The desperate voice of Eldrin Vaz echoed in his mind. "We beg for aid. Anyone who hears this, please help us." It wasn't the first time Carter had heard such a call. Across the galaxy, there were always weaker races left to die when it was inconvenient for the Galactic Alliance to act. His crew was waiting for his decision. His first officer, Commander Lee, finally spoke. "Sir, if we go alone." Carter nodded. He already knew that. If the Alliance had abandoned Veridon 6, then the moment humanity interfered, they would be breaking protocol. But Carter didn't care about protocols. He turned to Lieutenant Mason. "How many ships are within range?" "Just ours, sir," Mason replied. "The rest of the fleet is 3 jumps away." Carter exhaled sharply. One ship against an invading force. He wasn't suicidal, but he wasn't heartless either. He turned to Tactical Officer Ramirez. "What are we up against?" Ramirez pulled up the scans. The Greylock fleet is massive. At least 12 warships, dozens of fighters, and a full invasion force on the ground. He hesitated. "Sir, the odds are bad." Carter smirked. "They always are." A risky decision. Commander Lee stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Sir, I need to ask, are we really doing this? 1 Terran warship against a full invasion force." Carter's expression hardened. "They sent a call for help, Commander, and no one else is answering." "But we can't win alone," Lee argued. "It's suicide." Carter leaned forward, locking eyes with his second-in-command. "Maybe, but we can stall them. If we can disrupt their attack, maybe Veridon 6 survives long enough for backup to arrive." Lee hesitated, then nodded. "Understood, sir." Carter turned back to his crew. "Set course for Veridon 6. Maximum speed." Mason hesitated. "Sir, should we inform High Command?" Carter didn't even think about it. "No. If we ask permission, they'll order us to stand down. We move now." "Yes, Captain." The ship rumbled as the engines roared to life. The TSS Valor turned, aligning its trajectory toward the doomed world. Within minutes, it vanished into hyperspace, the final stand of the Zerathians. Meanwhile, on Veridon 6, the capital city Vorith was burning. Eldrin Vaz stood on the rooftop of his command center, watching the chaos below. Smoke filled the air. The streets were covered in rubble. The Zerathian defense forces had fought bravely, but they were not warriors. The Greylock were closing in. Laura Kane ran up behind him, her face pale. "Sir, the last of our forces have fallen back. We have nowhere left to run." Eldrin clenched his fists. This was it, the end of his people. He looked up at the sky. No ships, no reinforcements, no help. No one was coming. He turned back to Laura, about to speak, when suddenly the sky ripped open. Humanity arrives. A blue flash tore through the clouds as a ship dropped out of hyperspace. It was small compared to the massive Greylock warships, but its sleek, dark hull was unmistakable. A Terran warship. Eldrin's breath caught in his throat. "Is that?" Before Laura could answer, the comms officer shouted, "Incoming transmission. The speakers crackled to life. A deep, steady voice came through. "This is Captain Elias Carter of the Terran warship Valor. Hold the line. You are not alone." For the first time in days, hope returned to Eldrin's eyes. Laura whispered, almost disbelieving, "The humans came." But the battle was far from over. The Greylock fleet turned, recognizing the new arrival. Their commander sneered. "One ship. They send a single ship to fight us." He laughed. Captain Carter sat back in his chair, calm and collected. "One ship is all we need." Then, with a wave of his hand, he gave the order. "Fire. To be continued." The horror of war. The first shot from the TSS Valor tore through the silence of space like a thunderclap. A bright blue energy beam lanced out from the ship's forward cannons, streaking across the void at impossible speed. The Greylock warships barely had time to react before the blast struck the nearest enemy frigate. The impact ripped through the alien hull, setting off a chain reaction of explosions. Within seconds, the frigate detonated into a fireball, debris scattering in all directions. On the bridge of the Valor, Captain Elias Carter watched the explosion without flinching. "Direct hit," reported Tactical Officer Ramirez. Carter didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. One ship was down, 11 more to go. "Keep firing," he ordered. "Make them bleed." The Greylock counterattack. For a moment, the Greylock fleet hesitated. They had never faced humans in battle before. They had never expected a single Terran warship to charge into their invasion fleet. But then, their hesitation vanished. "Destroy them," bellowed Overlord Vrazak, the Greylock commander. His massive flagship, the Doombringer, turned toward the tiny human vessel. A swarm of enemy fighters launched from the larger warships, streaking toward the Valor like a cloud of metal death. Behind them, the Greylock dreadnoughts began charging their weapons. The counterattack had begun. A battle against the impossible. "Incoming fire," shouted Ramirez. The enemy ships unleashed a barrage of plasma bolts. The air on the Valor's bridge shimmered as the shields absorbed the first few hits. But Carter knew they couldn't take this kind of punishment forever. "Evade," he ordered. The Valor's pilot, Lieutenant Harris, pulled the ship into a sharp roll. The sleek human warship twisted and darted between enemy fire, dodging plasma bolts by mere meters. The Greylock, used to fighting slower, bulkier alien fleets, were not prepared for the speed and precision of a Terran warship. "Target their engines," Carter commanded. The Valor's railguns roared to life. High-velocity slugs tore through space, slamming into the thrusters of a Greylock destroyer. The ship lurched, its engines flickering before a second volley ripped it apart. Another enemy ship down. But more were coming. On the ground, a desperate fight. Meanwhile, on Veridon 6, the city burned. Eldrin Vaz and Laura Kane stood atop their command center, watching as the battle above unfolded in the sky. The Zerathians had never seen a real war, not like this. "The humans, they're actually fighting them," Laura whispered in awe. But while the battle raged in orbit, the ground war was far from over. The Greylock troops had breached the last Zerathian defenses. Enormous, armored warriors stormed through the streets, their plasma rifles tearing through anything in their path. The Zerathians fought as best they could, but they were scientists and scholars, not soldiers. Their weapons were primitive, their tactics defensive. They were losing. A massive explosion shook the city as a Greylock heavy walker, a towering mechanical war machine, crushed through a line of Zerathian defenders. Laura gasped. "We can't hold much longer." Eldrin clenched his fists. "Then we die fighting." But then, a new sound filled the air. A deep, roaring thunder. From the sky, metal pods came streaking down like meteors. They slammed into the ground behind enemy lines, sending shockwaves through the battlefield. The Greylock warriors turned in confusion. The pods hissed open, and Terran soldiers stepped out. The Terran drop troops arrive. The humans had landed. Dressed in advanced combat armor, carrying high-powered rifles, the Terran Marines wasted no time. They opened fire immediately. Bright blue pulse rounds ripped through the Greylock forces with deadly accuracy. The enemy, used to fighting weaker races, suddenly found themselves outmatched. Commander Ava Reynolds, leader of the Terran ground forces, stepped forward. She raised her rifle, aiming at the Greylock heavy walker that had been tearing through Zerathian forces. She pulled the trigger. A high-explosive anti-armor round screamed from her weapon, slamming into the machine's head. The massive walker staggered, then collapsed in flames. The Zerathians stared in shock. "Humans," Laura whispered. Commander Reynolds turned to her troops. "Advance. Push them back." The Terran forces surged forward, cutting through the Greylock lines like a knife through flesh. Eldrin Vaz couldn't believe what he was seeing. For the first time, the Greylock were not winning. For the first time, Viridon 6 had a chance. Above the battlefield, a deadly showdown. In orbit, the Valor was still fighting alone. Captain Carter gritted his teeth as the ship shook from another plasma blast. "Shields at 40%, shouted Ramirez. Carter knew they couldn't hold much longer. If they didn't do something soon, they'd be dead. Then, an idea hit him. "Bring us right into their formation," he ordered. Commander Lee's eyes widened. "You want to get closer?" "Yes," Carter said with a dangerous smile. "Right up close." The Valor's engines roared. The small but deadly Terran warship dived straight into the heart of the enemy fleet, weaving between the massive Greylock battleships. The enemy, too slow to react, began firing at each other by accident. Confusion spread through their ranks. Carter saw his opening. "Fire torpedoes. Everything we have." The Valor's missile bays opened. Dozens of torpedoes shot forward, streaking toward the Greylock command ship, the Doombringer. Overlord Vrazek barely had time to react before the first torpedo hit. Then the second. Then all the rest. The Doombringer exploded in a massive fireball, sending shockwaves through space. The Greylock fleet panicked. Some began retreating. Others, leaderless and broken, fought each other. The tide of battle had turned. Victory? Not yet. On the ground, Eldrin Vaz saw the explosions in the sky. His heart pounded. "Their flagship is down." Laura gasped. "The humans. They're winning." But Captain Carter's voice came over the comms. "We're not done yet." The battle for Viridon 6 was not over. But for the first time, the Zerathians had hope. To be continued. Humanity unleashes hell. The sky burned above Viridon 6. The once dominant Greylock fleet was now in chaos. Their flagship, the Doombringer, had been obliterated by the Terran warship Valor. Some enemy ships tried to flee, but others, too stubborn or too furious, refused to retreat. The battle in space was far from over. And on the ground, the war was still raging. Terran Marines strike back. Commander Ava Reynolds wiped dust from her visor and checked her rifle. Smoke and fire filled the ruined streets around her. The Terran drop troops had landed in the middle of a war zone, and they were winning. The Greylock warriors, once unstoppable against the weaker Zerathians, now faced a real fight. "Push forward," Reynolds barked. Her soldiers advanced, moving with deadly precision. Their high-powered pulse rifles spat blue plasma, cutting down the hulking Greylock warriors before they could react. The aliens were strong, but humans were faster, smarter, and better trained. A massive Greylock brute charged toward Reynolds, roaring. She calmly lifted her weapon and fired once. The armor-piercing round punched through the brute's thick skull, dropping it instantly. "Keep moving," she said, stepping over the corpse. The battle wasn't over yet. Eldrin Vaz seized the future. From the Zerathian command center, Eldrin Vaz and Laura Kane watched in disbelief. The humans were not just fighting. They were tearing the enemy apart. For the first time, the Zerathians weren't running. For the first time, they weren't alone. Laura turned to Eldrin, her voice shaky with emotion. "Sir, the humans are saving us." Eldrin swallowed hard. He had spent his whole life believing in diplomacy, peace, and reason. But the truth was clear now. Sometimes peace was not enough. Sometimes you needed warriors, and humanity had answered that call. The Greylock's last stand. The remaining Greylock forces gathered near the ruins of the Zarathian capital. Their commander, a scared warlord named Krogeth, snarled in fury. He could not understand it. How? He bellowed. How are these primitives winning? A nearby officer trembled. "Sir, their weapons, their tactics, they are unlike anything we've faced before." Krogeth clenched his claws. He would not accept this humiliation. "If we die," he growled, "we take them with us." He turned to his soldiers. "Activate the city killer." The officer stiffened. "Sir, but—" "Do it." A massive energy spike surged from the Greylock base. Commander Reynolds' comms crackled as her scanner officer shouted, "Commander, they just powered up a massive energy weapon." Reynolds' stomach dropped. What kind of weapon? A few seconds passed. Then the officer's voice came back, shaken. "It's a planetary bomb. If it goes off, it will wipe out this entire city, humans, Zarathians, and even their own troops." Reynolds cursed under her breath. The Greylock had decided to die fighting, unless the humans could stop them first. Captain Carter's bold move. On the bridge of the Valor, Captain Elias Carter watched the battle unfold. His crew was exhausted, but the job wasn't done yet. Ramirez turned from the tactical screen. "Captain, we've got a problem. Ground forces report the Greylock are about to detonate a city-destroying bomb." Carter's jaw tightened. "Can we destroy it from orbit?" Ramirez shook his head. "It's shielded. Our weapons won't penetrate it." Carter thought fast. There had to be another way. Then an idea hit him. "Bring us in low," he ordered. Lee's eyes widened. "You want to take the Valor into the atmosphere?" Carter nodded. "We can't hit the bomb with standard weapons. But if we can drop a strike team close enough, they can disable it." Lee hesitated, then nodded. "Understood, sir." Carter tapped his comms. "Commander Reynolds, get your team ready. You're about to be dropped right into hell." The final assault. Minutes later, a small group of elite Terran soldiers stood inside a drop pod, waiting for launch. Commander Reynolds checked her sidearm. "All right, listen up. This is a one-way trip. We drop in, we disable that bomb, and we get the hell out." The soldiers nodded, determined. Outside, the TSS Valor skimmed through the smoke-filled skies, dodging enemy fire as it closed in on the Greylock stronghold. "Drop team ready." Carter's voice came through. Reynolds grinned. "Always." "Then go." The drop pod's doors slammed shut. With a deafening roar, it blasted toward the surface. Inside, Reynolds felt the crushing G-forces push against her body. Around her, her team held steady. Below them, the Greylock stronghold loomed, and the city killer bomb ticked closer to detonation. Time was running out. The drop pod hit the ground hard, slamming into the battlefield. The doors exploded open, and the Terran soldiers rushed out, weapons ready. The final fight had begun, and humanity wasn't here to lose. To be continued. The turning point. The drop pod doors burst open, releasing a wave of Terran Marines into the heart of the Greylock stronghold. Commander Ava Reynolds hit the ground running, her rifle raised, eyes scanning for targets. Gunfire and plasma blasts filled the air as her team pushed forward, cutting through the enemy with deadly precision. The massive city killer bomb loomed ahead, an enormous structure humming with deadly energy. "Eyes on the bomb." Reynolds shouted. "We don't have much time." Behind her, Sergeant Keller checked his scanner. 10 minutes before detonation. 10 minutes until the city, and everyone in it, was vaporized. Reynolds gritted her teeth. "Then we move fast." The Greylock's last stand. The Greylock defenders weren't going to let the humans through without a fight. Massive warriors in heavy armor stormed forward, roaring in their guttural language. Plasma cannons and energy blades crackled as they charged straight at the human squad. Reynolds ducked as a Greylock warrior swung a massive blade at her head. She rolled to the side, raised her rifle, and fired point-blank into its chest. The alien staggered, its thick armor cracking, before a second shot punched straight through, dropping it to the ground. Sergeant Keller tossed a grenade over a barricade, sending Greylock soldiers flying as it detonated. Private Jenkins, the squad's sniper, took precise headshots from a rooftop, thinning the enemy ranks. But for every enemy they dropped, more came. Reynolds knew they couldn't win a drawn-out fight. They had to reach that bomb. Now, Carter makes a move. Above them, the TSS Valor was still engaged in a furious space battle. Captain Elias Carter gripped the armrest of his command chair as the ship shuddered from another direct hit. "Shields at 18%, Captain," Ramirez warned. Carter's jaw tightened. The enemy fleet was damaged, but still outnumbered them. If they stayed much longer, they'd be blown out of the sky. But if they left, the ground team would be stranded. Carter made his choice. "Bring us in lower," he ordered. Lee blinked. "Sir, we're already inside the atmosphere. Any lower and..." "Do it." The Valor roared as it dove toward the surface, skimming over the battlefield just meters above the ruins. The Greylock forces on the ground looked up in shock as the massive Terran warship loomed overhead. Carter pointed toward the bomb site. "Target their reinforcements. All weapons. Fire." The Valor's cannons erupted, sending a storm of laser fire and railgun rounds raining down on the enemy positions. Buildings collapsed, vehicles exploded, and entire squads of Greylock were vaporized in the fiery assault. Reynolds grinned. "Now that's backup." Disarming the bomb. With the Greylock defenses weakened, Reynolds and her team rushed toward the bomb. It was a massive, pulsating construct, glowing with unstable energy. Thick cables connected it to power conduits, feeding it the energy needed for detonation. Sergeant Keller ran a quick scan. "The bomb is heavily shielded. We can't just shoot it." Reynolds turned to their tech specialist, Corporal Davis. "Can you disable it?" Davis sprinted to the control panel, fingers flying over the alien interface. "I can try," he muttered, "but this thing is built for self-destruction. If I cut the wrong wire, it might go off faster." Reynolds nodded. "Then don't cut the wrong wire." Davis let out a nervous chuckle. "No pressure, huh?" The clock ticked down. 5 minutes left. Then, suddenly, an alert flashed on Davis' screen. His eyes widened. "Oh, that's bad." Reynolds frowned. "How bad?" Davis gulped. "They set it to a fail-safe mode. If I disable it wrong, it detonates immediately." Reynolds cursed. "So what do we do?" Davis hesitated. Then his fingers moved faster than ever. "I'm going to reroute the power into a feedback loop. Instead of exploding, it'll just burn itself out." Reynolds glanced at the countdown. 2 minutes. "Work fast, Corporal," she muttered. Final push. The Greylock commander, Krogath, had seen enough. From the far side of the battlefield, he roared in fury and charged toward the bomb site, leading a final desperate attack. "Here they come," Jenkins shouted. Reynolds turned, rifle raised. "Hold the line. Buy Davis some time." The final battle began. Terran Marines fired relentlessly, holding back the Greylock onslaught. Grenades exploded, plasma bolts flew, and soldiers fought in brutal hand-to-hand combat. Reynolds ducked under a Greylock blade, fired into the enemy's chest, and kicked the body aside. Krogath himself leaped toward her, swinging a massive energy axe. Reynolds barely dodged, rolling to the side. Krogath lunged again, but before he could strike, a sniper shot rang out. Jenkins' round pierced Krogath's skull, dropping the Greylock commander instantly. The enemy forces faltered, leaderless and demoralized. And then, Davis slammed his fist onto the control panel. The bomb flashed bright, and then dimmed. The countdown stopped. Bomb is neutralized. Davis cheered. A moment of silence. Then, across the battlefield, the Greylock forces broke. Their fleet crippled, their leaders dead, and their ultimate weapon disabled. They turned and fled. What little remained of them. A cheer erupted from the Terran and Zerethian forces alike. They had won. Aftermath. A new alliance. Hours later, Captain Carter stood on the surface of Veridon 6, watching the burning wreckage of the enemy forces. Eldrin Vass approached him, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and gratitude. "You saved us," Eldrin said, "when no one else would." Carter nodded. "That's what humans do." Eldrin took a deep breath. "The Zerethians owe humanity a debt that can never be repaid. If ever you need us, we will be there." Carter smiled. "Let's just call it a friendship, then." Laura Kane stepped forward, looking up at the sky. "The rest of the galaxy is going to hear about this, about what you did." Carter's expression turned serious. "They'll hear," he said. "And they'll know what happens when humanity answers a call for help." The sun rose over Veridon 6. A new alliance was born, and humanity's legend was just beginning. The end. Fire and fury. The aftermath of the battle still hung heavy in the air. Smoke curled from the ruins of Veridon 6's capital city, but for the first time in days, there was silence. No more screaming, no more war cries, no more thunderous explosions. The Greylock were defeated. Their remaining forces had fled the battlefield, leaving their fallen behind. But this war was not over. Captain Carter's decision. On the bridge of the TSS Valor, Captain Elias Carter stood with arms crossed, staring at the tactical display. The Greylock fleet had been crippled, but their retreating ships were regrouping just beyond the system. Carter knew what that meant. "They're calling for reinforcements," said Commander Lee, standing beside him. "We might have won this battle, sir, but if their fleet comes back at full strength, they'll finish what they started." Carter muttered. His jaw clenched. "We can't let them escape." Ramirez, his tactical officer, turned in his seat. "Captain, we could chase them down, but we're running low on ammo, and our shields are barely holding. If we push too far—" "We don't need to chase them," Carter said. "We just need to make sure they don't come back." Commander Lee frowned. "How do we do that?" Carter turned toward the holographic map. His eyes narrowed. "We send them a message. The Greylock retreat, or so they thought." Aboard one of the remaining Greylock warships, Overlord Vrazek's second-in-command, General Xorvac, snarled in frustration. The humans had humiliated them. The Zerethians should have been nothing. A weak race, ripe for conquest. The Alliance had abandoned them, and yet somehow, against all odds, the Terrans had stopped their invasion. But Xorvac still had enough ships to regroup. If they could call for reinforcements, they could return with overwhelming force. He turned to his comms officer. "Send the signal. Tell High Command we need an armada." The officer hesitated. "Sir, the Terran warship, it's moving." Xorvac turned toward the viewport. His blood ran cold. The TSS Valor was heading straight for them. A terrifying display of power. The Greylock expected the humans to retreat, to lick their wounds and flee. Instead, Carter was bringing the fight to them. Inside the Valor, Carter stood tall as he gave the order. "Charge the rail cannons. Lock onto their flagship." Ramirez's hands moved across the controls. "Weapons ready, Captain." Carter's voice was calm but firm. "Fire." A moment later, the ship trembled as two hyper-accelerated projectiles launched from the Valor's primary railguns. They streaked across space, moving faster than the eye could track, before slamming into the Greylock flagship. The result was instantaneous. The first shot pierced the ship's forward hull, tearing through multiple decks. The second struck the reactor core. For a brief moment, the ship glowed like a dying star. Then it erupted in a fiery explosion, sending shockwaves through the void. The other Greylock ships halted. Their commander was dead, and they had nowhere to run. Carter's ultimatum. The remaining Greylock warships scrambled to pull away, their engines burning hard to escape. Carter let them run. But before they could disappear into the darkness, he activated the Valor's comms and broadcast his voice across all frequencies. "This is Captain Elias Carter of the Terran Federation." His voice was cold, unwavering. "You attacked a peaceful world. You slaughtered innocent people. You thought no one would come to stop you." The Greylock ships continued running, but they were listening now. Carter leaned forward, his tone deadly serious. "Consider this your only warning. If the Greylock Empire ever sets foot in this system again, if you ever threaten the Zerathians or any other innocent people, we will find you." His next words were not a threat. They were a promise. "And we will burn your worlds to the ground." The transmission cut out. For a long moment, there was silence. Then, one by one, the Greylock ships turned and vanished into hyperspace. The war was over, and humanity's message was clear. Victory and a new beginning. Back on the surface of Veridon 6, the Zerathians stood among the ruins of their once beautiful city. Their world was scared. Their people were exhausted, but they had survived. Heldren Vaz watched as the human soldiers moved through the streets, helping his people, distributing supplies, treating the wounded, rebuilding. Laura Kane stood beside him, shaking her head in amazement. "They fought for us," she murmured. "They had no reason to, but they still came." Eldrin exhaled. "And now the whole galaxy will know. The Terrans, they don't just talk about justice." He turned toward the sky, where the TSS Valor hovered like a guardian angel. "They enforce it." Carter and Eldrin. A new alliance. Later that day, Carter stood on the steps of the ruined Zerathian command center, speaking with Eldrin Vaz. "You don't owe us anything," Carter said. "We didn't come here for rewards or alliances." Eldrin smiled. "And that is exactly why we want one." He extended his hand. Carter shook it. At that moment, a new alliance was formed, not from politics or treaties, but from loyalty and trust. And that was something far stronger than any paper agreement. The message spreads across the stars. News of humanity's intervention spread quickly. The Galactic Alliance, ashamed, tried to downplay their inaction. The Greylock licked their wounds, but fear crept into their empire, because for the first time, they had tasted defeat. And across the stars, other weaker races took notice. They had once believed themselves alone, helpless in the face of great powers. But now, they had seen what the Terrans had done, and they knew. If you called for help, humanity would answer. With fire and fury, a new legend begins. The battle was over, but its impact would echo across the galaxy. On Veridon 6, the sun rose over a damaged but victorious world. Smoke still curled from the ruins, but the sound of battle had been replaced with something else. Hope. The Zerathians, once a doomed people, now had a future. And the galaxy was beginning to realize what had happened. The Galactic Alliance reacts. On the capital world of the Galactic Alliance, the High Council gathered in their massive chamber. The air was tense. A holographic display showed footage of the battle on Veridon 6, the human warship, the destruction of the Greylock fleet, and most concerning of all, Captain Elias Carter's message. "If the Greylock ever set foot in this system again, we will find you, and we will burn your worlds to the ground." The council members whispered nervously. One of them, a green-skinned Dorlathi official, folded his hands. The humans acted without authorization. They should be punished. Another, a reptilian Scaran representative, scoffed. "Punished? Are you a fool? The Terrans did what we were too afraid to do. If we speak against them now, we will look even weaker." An old avian counselor, one of the few with wisdom, leaned forward. Perhaps this is not a threat, but an opportunity. The room fell silent. The humans had shown they would fight for the defenseless. The question now was, would they become protectors or conquerors? The Alliance needed to decide, fast, because the rest of the galaxy was already watching. The Greylock's fear. Deep within Greylock space, the remnants of their shattered fleet limped back to one of their fortress worlds. A meeting of Greylock warlords was called. They watched the same battle footage, their expressions dark and furious. "We underestimated them," one growled. "These humans fight like no species we have ever faced before." "Not just fight," another corrected. "They destroy. They do not just win wars. They end them." General Thorvac, the highest-ranking officer left from the Veridan 6 invasion, clenched his claws. "What do we do?" A long silence. Then the supreme overlord of the Greylock spoke. "We wait. We learn. And when the time is right." His eyes burned with rage. "We will show them that fire and fury can be answered in kind." The war was not over. It was just beginning. Humanity's new reputation. Across the stars, the story of Veridan 6 spread like wildfire. Weak races whispered of the Terrans, the species that had answered a cry for help when no one else would. On countless planets, those who had once lived in fear of warlords and empires now dared to hope. Because now, they knew a truth that could not be ignored. If you were weak, if you were hunted, if you were abandoned by the galaxy, you were not alone. Because somewhere, out there, was a species that would not run from war. A species that would not stand by while the innocent suffered. A species that would fight for those who could not fight for themselves. And if you sent a desperate call for help, humanity would answer. With fire, with fury, and with a wrath the galaxy had never seen before. Epilogue. The Promise. On the bridge of the TSS Valor, Captain Elias Carter stood with his hands behind his back, watching the stars. The battle was won. The Greylock had been driven away. The Zarethians had survived. But Carter knew this was not the end. It was just the beginning of something much bigger. He turned as Commander Lee approached. "Sir, we're getting transmissions from all over. Other species, ones who have been afraid to speak out against the powerful. They're asking about us, about the Terran Federation." Carter exhaled. This was how it started. First, one battle. Then, a reputation. And soon, a movement. Carter's voice was quiet but firm. "Send a message back." Lee nodded. "What should we say?" Carter turned toward the stars, his eyes steely and unyielding. "Tell them," he said, "that if they ever need us, if they ever face the kind of terror the Zarethians faced." His gaze darkened. "Tell them we'll come. Because that's what humanity does." The stars shone bright outside the viewport. A new era had begun. Humanity had arrived. And the galaxy would never be the same again.